The Hawk That Dare Not Hunt by Day by Scott Odell, Chapter 8. Master Tyndale arrived early the next morning with a parcel of books in a string bag and the shabby clothes he stood up in. I found him in a berth in the forecastle, a dark cubbyhole where we kept spare anchor chain. No sooner had he stowed his books and lighted a candle than he had pen and paper out and had sat himself down to write on a barrel head. We moved the ship downriver to Deptford and docked her there in the yard, and on he wrote. He was still writing when I went to call him for supper. Master Belsey came aboard at Deptford carrying a small trunk on his back, a sailor's trunk that looked as if it had been around the world many times. I found him a bunk in the stern amid the cargo, as far from Tyndale as possible, and promptly put him to work cleaning out the bilge. It was a dirty job, but to my surprise, he went about it with a right good will. I did not look forward to supper, since we had only one mess. Everyone, captain, coxswain, and crew, all eating at one table. Uncle Jack liked this arrangement because it gave him a chance to talk 3 times a day to an audience that could not escape. But supper went well. Tyndale sat apart from Belsey, and if the two spoke, I failed to hear it. Afterward, while the crew sat about chatting, Tyndale rose quietly and left. As Uncle Jack and I made a last round of the ship before bed, he accosted us on deck and asked for another candle. My uncle gave him 2 and promised him a handful before we sailed. Our cargo of woolens stored, the mast repaired, and supplies stowed, we caught the first of the ebb 2 days later and coasted downriver at a leesome rate. We lost half a day at the river's mouth with a blinding fog, then a whole day at Gravesend with the rumor of a pirate scare in the harbor. The previous day, a merchantman had been boarded and scuttled a few leagues to the northeast, and all but one of its crew had been killed. There were 9 ships waiting at anchor to make the channel crossing when we arrived. Fortunately for all, the Mary Rose, the king's man of war, sailed by chance down from Portsmouth, under full canvas on her way to Ostend. She came about after sighting us, and after an exchange of information, we were told to fall in astern, which we gratefully did. It was a pretty sight to see, the Mary Rose keening along forward of us, even though she was sailing with half her canvas so that we slower ships could keep apace. From her masts, the great high-castled carrack floated long streamers of Tudor green and white, the red-crossed flag of St. George, and above all, the royal standard. A league or so off the coast of Cornwall, she opened her gun ports on the starboard side and fired 5 shots. Duff, 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 duff. Whether she was firing at a pirate ship, we did not know, only that we were not attacked then or later. The mighty ship led us for the better part of the morning. Then, raising all sails, she continued us to continue the crossing alone. She left us, to continue the crossing alone. She carries near 200 big guns of brass and iron, Uncle Jack said. We were standing forward, the 2 of us, with a fine view of the brilliantly painted ship as she pulled away on the calm sea under a sky of slow white clouds. And her racks are stacked with thousands long bows, swords, and pikes, he went on. She's filled with armored men. They even cling to the fighting tops like nests of ants. At any moment she can launch forth a veritable blizzard of shot and shell and a flood of fighting soldiers. Yet the Mary Rose and the Great Harry and all the rest of the king's conquering ships cannot withstand that which Master Tyndale now prepares there below in his darksome cubby. In that fusty hole, the true words of the Lord, shining forth from the Testament, shall sweep all of England before them. The true words, praise the Lord. Despite the praise the Lord, I think that perhaps for the first time in his life, Uncle Jack really believed what he had intoned. "He works diligently," I said. "He has about used up all of our candles." "Fire him a lantern," said Uncle Jack. "We're very short on lanterns." "Take him a lantern." At dusk, I complied with my uncle's request against my better judgment, robbing one of our set of riding lights. As I reached the passageway on my way to Tyndale, I saw standing before the door of his cubby a tall figure that I had once recognized as Master Belsey. Shining the lantern in his face, I asked him if he was looking for somebody. "I'm looking for Master Tyndale," he said. "He was absent from the noon mess. I thought he might be seasick, inasmuch as we've been in a roll and pitch most of the day." "We'll see," I said. Believing not a word of Belsey's story, I knocked on the door. There was no answer. And only after I had knocked a second and a third time did Tyndale appear. He wore a cap, but his hair stuck out as if he had been worrying it. There were books everywhere, on the cubby floor, on the barrel head, on the shelf against the ship's bulkhead. Papers lay about in great disorder. "I've bought you a light at the captain's request," I said, passing the lantern to him. "Tomorrow I'll bring you a jug of oil to replenish it." He thanked me absent-mindedly and turned back to his papers. Belsey took a step forward as if bent upon entering the cubby, but I blocked his path. Closing the door firmly, more or less in his face, I waited for him to shuffle off down the passage. Tyndale called to me, and I went back inside the cubbyhole, tripping over a stack of books, and closed the door. "Have you read the Luther Manifesto yet?" he asked, not looking away from the paper he was writing on. "No, sir, I haven't." He looked up from his paper, looked me squarely in the face. "Can you read, Master Barton?" he asked. I didn't intend to be truthful, but he kept looking at me until, in desperation, at last I blurted out, "No, I can't. I've never read a word in my life. Only the letters on a compass card. N, an S, an E, and W. That's all I've ever read." "Do you want to learn to read?" "Yes," I said, "but not tonight. Tonight I have things to do." "Then tomorrow," Tyndale said. "We'll begin tomorrow morning early." Master Tyndale started upon me at dawn. As soon as breakfast was over, he marched me into his cubbyhole like a true professor and sat me down on a pile of books. I thought of several duties that I needed to perform in other parts of the ship. I hoped that it would blow up a storm and he would become seasick. But all of my excuses came to naught, and the weather stayed fair. He used part of the New Testament on me, the one he was translating into English. First, he showed me a Bible written in Greek and a Bible written in Hebrew, and one written in German and one in French, then the one written in Latin. "Why do you need a Bible written in English," I asked him, "when already you have so many Bibles?" "Because Englishmen read the English language and do not read other languages," he said. "But, sir, you have to be able to read English words before you can read an English Bible." "Yes, that's why you're here, so that you may learn to read English words, to know English words when you see them, and then to be able to speak them, and then to know what the words that you have spoken mean." "It sounds very difficult," I said. "It is." Far off, above my head, I heard the slatting of our mainsail, which needed trimming at once, and I spoke of this to Master Tyndale. "I'll go and see that it is trimmed," I said, "and then I'll come back." "Someone else will trim the sail. There are others in the crew who can do that. Stay where you are, and we'll begin our first lesson." I slid off the stack of books, which were uncomfortable, and sat on the floor. We'll start at a part of the Bible called the First Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Corinthians. Later, I will tell you about Paul and who the Corinthians were. Now, we'll start with Paul's words and discuss how these words sounded as he spoke them to the people who had gathered to hear them. "Though I spake with tongues of men and angels, and yet had no love, I were even as sounding brass, or as a tinkling cymbal. And though I could prophesy and understood all secrets and all knowledge. Yea, if I had all faith so that I could move mountains out of their places and yet had no love, I were nothing. I listened, though still hearing the slat of the mainsail. There was a sweet, strong sound as he spoke these words. They filled the cubbyhole with their music. Now come, Tom, and stand here. His manuscript lay open on a slanting bench we once used for anchored chain. Master Tyndale pointed to the first letter of the first word he had read. This is the letter T, he said. What does it look like to you? Nothing came to mind. Does it look like a stick with a hat on it? I looked again over his shoulder at his finger pointing out this letter T and suddenly saw that it did look like a stick with a hat atop. Yes, I see it now, I said. Well, when you see it again, you'll recognize it as a letter T. I will, sir, but how many letters are there altogether? 26. I gasped, but said nothing. 26? Now pronounce the letter. Like a child, I said, T. Now the first letter of the third word, said Master Tyndale, pointing at an S. What does that look like to you? To me, I said, of a sudden inspired, it looks like a snake. Exactly, Master Tyndale said, and now what sort of sound is made by a snake? It hisses. So does the letter S. Speak it and see. I did, and I sounded like a snake hissing. We'll have another lesson soon in the English Bible, Tyndale said, the way that it should be read. The Greek tongue is much closer to English than it is to Latin. It has more grace and sweetness and pure understanding, and the qualities of the Hebrew tongue agree 1,000 times more with English than with Latin. English boys speak English words. Why then should they not read the Bible in English? Above me I heard Uncle Jack calling my name. Master Tyndale heard it too, and put away his manuscript and gave me a pat on the back, which felt odd because it was the first pat I'd had in a long time. End of chapter 8.